I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
I think we have the greatest setup in CJ show history. See, for anybody listening, CJ is currently in a Merit Bank Arena. It's like on the lower bowl on the 100 level, right? And on the background of you is the stadium, is the rink.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Game 2 goes tonight. We got all the towels out here, and I'm literally alone. Like, it feels like no one else is in the rink.
What are you doing there? Like, why are you at the rink so early?
Because we had to do this podcast, which is not a bad thing, but the Oilers are available to the media here in about 2 hours. Okay. And so rather than, because I'm not staying, the logistics of South Florida can be complicated. Mm-hmm. So I figured it was easiest just to get the rink, be where I got to be later in the day for my day job, and, give everyone a little look inside a quiet arena hours before a Stanley Cup final game.
It's so cool. You're literally the only person in the arena right now. Not the workers. All the towels are already out. Nobody's walking around cleaning because it's already clean. It's just you hanging out. That's incredible.
Yeah, there's no noise, no Zamboni.
Wow.
It is kind of cool. I don't know what it is, because obviously the contrast or when the game itself goes, it's going to be so loud and everything. It's like being in like a big empty rink before you know something cool is going to happen is no feeling like it.
Yeah, because I think like the point of the arena is that it's loud and there's fans cheering. So to be in there, is it kind of eerie or is it just like a calm coolness? Like what's
honestly,
the feeling?
It's more exciting than anything because it's sort of like you feel the anticipation. Mm-hmm. Like I know what it's going to be later. I know how amped up I'm going to be watching the game, and when there will be 19 or 20,000 people here. So it's more kind of like, all right, it's cool. I get to be alone, but I know I won't be alone too long in this building.
Nice. And we're going to start with game 1, obviously, and we'll get into all that. But before that, I want to know what it's like outside of the arena. What's the vibe in Sunrise in South Florida? Is there a buzz in the city? Is everybody talking about it? What's the feeling down there right now?
Yeah, I've been open about this. This used to be my least favorite of 30 cities back in the day. I'm going back 10 years or so. I just was never ever in this arena, frankly, for a good game, like a buzzy game, a game where there's lots of people, where you felt like you're at an event. And to see it now, like I have to go back in time and kick myself in the butt because I really believed back then. I was like, why is there even a team here? What's the point? Because I went to years and years and years, I'm talking, Jesse, where I would come down here to cover games and just was nothing. And, I noticed it last year. I was here in the second round when the Leafs played the Panthers. To be here, obviously, in the Stanley Cup final, like this market is energized by the team. Talking to some of the locals, it sounds like it's the kind of place that really gets behind a winner. Even teams like the Miami Heat or the Dolphins can struggle at times when they're not performing well on the field or on the court. And so, yeah, it's you definitely know the Stanley Cup finals happening. There are tons of Panther fans everywhere. Like you go to a restaurant 20 minutes away, someone's wearing a T-shirt or what have you. At my hotel, again, which is not next door to the rink, so it's sort of in a random spot. There's people in jerseys that obviously have come in from other parts of the state or what have you. So it's got great energy, I would say, in Florida. And, this team's, when you look in hindsight, they've built up to this. They had an ownership change. They've gotten better players. They won a President's Trophy a couple of years ago and then lost earlier in the playoffs than they wanted. They got there last year. Like, there's a progression that's been taking place. And, it's not the Panthers of 2015, I'll tell you that much, or 2014 or 2013. The years when I was first maybe coming down here for games. This is a legit hockey team on the ice, but even off the ice, they have everything you could want from their fan base. Any
CJ Show listeners you've run into?
Yeah, I actually just bumped into 3 guys in Oilers jerseys on my way into the rink. So they were out here doing a hit on Good Morning America, and they shouted out the pod. Yeah. I actually went, this is a shout out to Julian more because it was his spot. But I was at the Elbow Room the other night too. And, met a few loyal listeners. One guy even pulled up his phone. He's like, look at my last pod. It's yours. So, yeah, we got some fans down here too, which is nice to see.
Yeah, Julian definitely shut that place down. And I don't think they were left with any alcohol behind the bar after he was done with it.
Yeah, here's the thing. Its reputation is well earned, but I went once. I left early, and I will not go back. Like it's just too busy, too crazy, too sweaty. Like everything about it is not. It's hard to catch up with people there or have an actual conversation. But half the hockey world was there when I was there, and I'm sure they were there last night too. I didn't enjoy them.
Saturday night, game number 1, 3-0 victory by the Florida Panthers, 2 goals on a goalie, 1 empty net. And the story coming out of it, you wrote in The Athletic about Sergei Bobrovsky. And for me, and I think everybody watching, he was definitely the story of the game, stealing that victory for the Florida Panthers, who for most of the game were outplayed by Edmonton. Some of that score effects, obviously, but if we just look at the chances, Edmonton definitely had more, and Bobrovsky saved the day for Florida. So the takeaways from game 1, I think we start with Sergei and his unbelievable performance there in game 1.
Yeah, and the story for me, Jesse, is like, okay, he's awesome in that game, obviously, but where did this come from? This guy's coming up on his 36th birthday. Let's just rewind the clock 13, 14, 15 months. He was watching from the bench when Alex Lyon got the Panthers into the playoffs last year. And since then, he's just had this renaissance. He's become the goalie that the Panthers thought they were getting when they signed him to that $70 million contract. But, even 2 years ago, if we were doing this pod, even in the life that this pod existed, we could have talked about Sergei Bobrovsky and said something along the lines of, there's no way they could trade that contract. No team in the league would want him. And then you see him on that stage in that moment, deliver that performance. I mean, some of the underlying metrics suggest it was the best individual performance by a goaltender in any game in these playoffs. Wow. And certainly given what's at stake and the players he's going up against who are such offensively gifted guys. I mean, in the first minute of the game, I know he was the one who made the giveaway, but he's making a save. Then there's a couple breakaways. There's McDavid chances. He's doing the cartwheel stop. I mean, it was pretty cool to watch. And as I wrote in the story you're referencing, I do think if he wins this series, he's a surefire Hall of Famer. I mean, he might get in anyway, but like that's kind of the stakes if you're him at this stage of your career, almost 36. I mean, we don't know how many times he'll get to play games this big again, and the fact that he had that kind of game, I think was pretty special. Difficult for the Oilers, but I think it's a weird feeling after that loss. Like I don't sense any there's no deflating aspect to it from Edmonton, because I do think they're like, well, if we do the first 2 periods, some version of that again, it's what are the odds he can do it a second time or a third time? But yeah, it was one of those ones in the moment you could tell something special was going on, that he just had it. And I think you're going to see the Oilers shoot high on him now. I mean, there's even some open talk in the media, which is not kind of common when you get to this stage, but yesterday, some of the Oilers players were talking about the scouting that they've done on Bobrovsky and realized that, he's so quick laterally in his crease, and he really gets down there almost like a cat. Reminds me of like Jonathan Quick in his prime when he was playing for the Kings, would really take away the bottom half of the net and was so athletic you couldn't beat him there. I think we're going to see more shots trying to beat him over the shoulder or up under the bar based on the way that first game went.
Yeah, you wouldn't have seen this in the arena at the game, but on the Sportsnet broadcast, they showed the graphic of where he's allowed goals this playoffs, and no goals so far these playoffs have been allowed through his 5-hole. He's been unbelievable on anything down low, and everything that's gone in so far has been, I think there's 2 that went in on either side of his pads, but everything's been up high, and for the Oilers, that's the first takeaway. Yeah, you can't get anything by down low on Sergei Bobrovsky.
Yeah, and I think especially on those breakaways, right? I mean, you saw the players that had them kind of go for dekes or something. I think you just got to come in and shoot on them. Again, easy for me to say, man. I'm standing here holding a coffee in the rink, like it's an easy game when you're not playing it. But I think that you're going to see probably more shooting mentality from the Oilers. They did so much, I think, positive in that game, especially first 2 periods. That it actually makes it. I like the vibe heading to game 2 because it didn't feel like a feeling out game 1 to me. Like I felt like the teams really went at it, and neither team is sort of swayed by the result. Like it's almost like, okay, yeah, it's one game, but there's no sort of reactionary aspect to this. I think it's just, okay, what can we improve on the margins and go at it again? I mean, I still think this is going to be an epic series. I just have a weird feeling this is like a 6-7 games and we're going to see all sorts of crazy things. I mean, part of that is a Bobrovsky game, right? Are we going to get a McDavid game? Are we going to get, there's so many sort of individual stars in Kachuk. I mean, what how is that all going to come together? I don't know. I've got a great feeling about it. I hope I'm right. As much as I'd like to say, oh, get it over in 4, I'm going to go home. I got to get the summer started. I'm not going to say that this time. I want something memorable in hockey history to happen. And, I think we're going to get it. Just has that weird feeling this year.
Some of the discourse coming out of Edmonton is questioning Chris Knobloch and some of his decisions, because he repaired up Nurse and Ceci, and they were obviously on for both goals. And in both situations, there were errors by those defensemen where you say, like, hey, if you're in a better position, if you make a better play on that puck, maybe that goal doesn't go in. What do you think he does for game 2 with those two? And what do you think about their performance in game 1?
Well, my sense is they're going to go to 7 defensemen. They're going to bring Darnay into the Darnay. Oh man, that's a throwback. But into the game, I think that will give them, if they go with 7D, obviously they can mix and match a little bit more inside the game. Obviously, it's disruptive to the bench, but we've seen lots of teams over the years have success with this. Big John Cooperism back in the day in Tampa, back to the 2015 run. I remember they used 7 defensemen a lot often. And, the benefit for a team like the Oilers is their top forwards play so much anyway. I mean, are you really hurting yourself? You're creating a scenario with 11 forwards where, okay, McDavid or Draisaitl just get extra shifts with the fourth line here and there, opportunities maybe against different, players on the Florida end of things. And so, yeah, I mean, Darnell Nurse he just had one of those playoffs. Like, obviously hasn't always been good, but then he's also got pucks going in off his ass. He's got, the first goal in the last game, he's on the ice, but it's not, if you look at the way the coverage was handled there, it's not a play where the defenseman misplayed it. His forwards didn't help him out enough. So, it's just one of those ones. I think, is he minus 15 now, Jesse? Something in that range. Like,
yeah,
like it does. It doesn't look good on paper, right?
Steve Dangle had a stat. Sam Reinhart's dad holds the plus minus record for a playoffs, and Darnell Nurse might pass that. Like that's an unbelievable stat.
I know, and here's the flip side though. He plays a lot of minutes on a team in game 2 of the Stanley Cup final. Like, right. I do think some of what he does well is getting lost in this. But facts are the facts. Mm-hmm. There was 2 goals scored against the goaltender in that game. He was on the ice for both of them, as was Cody Ceci. And so I do think you're going to see a little less of that pairing and more mixing and matching of personnel. I mean, the tricky thing is that, they played Kulak on his offside on the right side at the end of the last series. I'm not sure if he's comfortable there. Then they got to move other players there. It's not a perfect setup. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, there are not enough right shot defensemen in the world. Every team seems to not have enough. And so I think it's all about how they accommodate for that fact. But I would think you're going to see Kulak maybe in put in a different spot there and a little bit less of Nurse and Ceci, because obviously at some point, as much as we can defend and say, hey, there's some bad luck here, those guys probably have their confidence a little bit hurt. And, Darnell's had a few, brushes with the media where you can tell he's aware of what's being said and all of what's going on. And so you want to have him in the right frame of mind, and maybe setting them out together and not having it go well is, not productive even for them in terms of bringing out the best of what they can have.
One of the more interesting battles I was looking forward to in this game, and I think it absolutely delivered, was Barkov versus McDavid. And Paul Maurice, he made it known, that's who he's deploying against the McDavid line. And I thought Barkov did such an exceptional job throughout that game, just tailing McDavid. And then Knobloch tried to make an adjustment early in the third, matching McDavid and Draisaitl together, load up that line. And they still couldn't get one by Bobrovsky. But I think Barkov just deserves a shout out for the defensive performance he's had all playoffs and in game 1.
Yeah, it's the defensive, but then he makes the play on the first goal to Verhaeghe, right? I mean, that's the thing. We're so focused on how is he going to shut down McDavid? It's like, well, maybe McDavid's also got to think of Barkov, right? I mean, he's not, right. He's an elite defensive player, but he's not one-dimensionally defensive. And that's kind of the beauty of that sort of matchup, I guess we'll call it, for Florida. The nuclear option in this series, I'm not sure. I mean, you're always going to see McDavid and Draisaitl get a few, shifts together. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. But I don't know if that's the best way to deploy them full time, full stop. And so, I think you're going to see a little less of that. I mean, I get it in that game. They're down 2-0. You just need one goal. That's the thought on the bench. We need one goal. What's the best way to try to produce one goal? Put those two together. But, I think because of how elite Barkov is, how elite the Forsling pairing is defensively, it's best to give Florida at least a second line that you're a little bit afraid of offensively, because I just don't think the Oilers right now, I mean, Evander Kane clearly is not at 100%. They already got Hyman up on that top line. I just don't think they have enough offensive weapons lower down the lineup that it scares Florida when you use Draisaitl and McDavid together. So I think we'll see a little less of the nuclear option in game 2, but I also am not really second guessing the decision, because how can you argue against, if you need one goal, what's the best way to try to get it? Put those guys together. There just was nothing else, though, in that third period, especially when they really played regularly as a line. There was not enough happening on the ice when other players were out there.
Yeah, and I think that's how they've been most effective throughout the Draisaitl-McDavid era, is when Draisaitl's on his own line, you spread out the talent, and the teams have to defend wave after wave of different McDavid-Draisaitl line combos. So yeah, I think that's the most effective way for Edmonton going into game 2 to game plan. And going into game 2, should Edmonton, I assume Edmonton's feeling okay because they played well in game 1, they just couldn't get one by. And I assume Florida's feeling really good because they didn't play well, but they still ended up with a victory. Who has more confidence going into game 2, and how do you see it playing out?
Well, Florida for sure. I mean, they got home ice advantage in the series. They got comfort on this level of play, right? I mean, they were here last year. It really didn't go well. If you remember the Vegas final, Florida was injured, out of gas. They got their asses kicked in that series. It was a quick one, 5 games. They didn't put their best foot forward. And again, they weren't in maybe the position to do so. But I think coming back here now, they've yet to play a 7-game series in the playoffs. I just feel like they're refreshed. They know what it takes. They're a great team. They've gotten deeper, probably arguably even since that team last year. And they're right now. I mean, the job for Edmonton, the simple job is, okay, you got to go win a game. You want to go home 1-1, obviously. But the other part of it, I think, is they have to somehow find a way to put a little doubt in the Panthers' minds. I feel like Florida has had this mindset all year. We're going to get back to the final. We're going to win. They haven't really, look, no season is without a bad loss here or there, but they haven't had a stretch where you're like, ooh, maybe it's gone for this team. I just think they're full of confidence. They know who they are. They know what they have to do. And even if they didn't have their best, they found a way to win. Usually teams think of that as a good omen, right? It's like, okay, we know we're going to be better just by default in the next game, and we're already up 1-0. So Edmonton, in addition to getting a win in this series, I think they have to start to introduce a little bit of panic on the Panthers, and a little bit of like, oh no, this is more than we can handle. And, I think they have the weapons to do that. Having a team with Connor McDavid, he and Draisaitl will have a big game. It could be 7-2 tonight, right? That's part of it. And something like that might be enough to make the Panthers question themselves. But right now, I just feel like they think it's automatic. They're here, they're where they're supposed to be, and they're going to win a series, at least until they maybe get some feedback that suggests something different.
Before game 1 on Saturday, you were in a room with Commissioner Bettman. First of all, what's that like? And then let's talk about the salary cap that was raised, I believe, $300,000 above where it was projected to be. We're going to have an $88 million salary cap going into next season. But first, what's it like being in a room with Gary Bettman? Because I've never had that privilege.
I've had a lot. It's funny. It kind of feels a little bit the same every year. Like he does this every year, right before game 1 of the Cup final, 2 hours before puck drop. He does sort of a State of the Union type address where any and all questions are fair game. Anything going on in the league becomes a talking point. This might have been a first, though, for me, Jesse. First time I was in one of those, no questions about Arizona. The Coyotes have been a talking point in those things forever, right? Like, what are they going to do with their arena? Where are they going to play? What's going to happen? Well, obviously the team's now moved to Utah, and so it was the first maybe where they weren't asked about. But it's a cool event. It's very formal, as you might imagine. It's sort of like it feels like you're back in school a little bit. Like it's right before the puck drops in game 1. Everyone's dressed nice, like it's a big event. And there was no fireworks. I would say sometimes Gary can be a bit combative with the media at times. Maybe it's just a product of where we are in the news cycle, but there aren't really, I guess, nothing's on fire right now, right? There's not a lot of pointed questions. Obviously there's questions about the London World Junior team, what could happen to those players. I'm not saying there aren't important topics being tackled there, but there was nothing that kind of got the commissioner's heart rate up, I guess, with the way the questions were asked in before that game. But it was, it's a pretty cool event, and probably went on for an hour maybe. So He's very available. Like they're not. That's the other thing. He sits there until there's no questions left to be asked. Like it's not one of these what I would say highly controlled situations where they're getting in to say they did it. No, I mean like the full credit of the league and to Gary Bettman. I mean he will sit there as long as someone wants to put their hand up and ask him a question.
A 5.4% bump to the salary cap is what was announced on Saturday. $88 million, as I mentioned. What does this mean for teams heading into free agency? Why did they do this? Why did they add the extra $300,000? Can you explain the players paid off their debt to the owners and now they get a bunch of money on the salary cap kind of thing?
Sure. Well, so just as a bit of a history lesson, when we went into the pandemic, the players and the owners extended the CBA with something called the Memorandum of Understanding. Basically, the old system didn't apply in the pandemic years because the old system said all players collectively get 50% of revenues from the owners each year, and that's what the salary cap produces. But the problem was there weren't going to be any revenues during the pandemic, or there certainly weren't going to be normal revenues because the buildings in most places in the league were empty. So they basically made a bridge agreement to account for that point in time. And the players basically accrued a debt because they were paid way more than half of what the revenues were in those pandemic years. And it's just now been repaid. And part of that agreement said when it's repaid, and if you are over certain thresholds of revenue, and I won't take you through all the numbers because I'm not trying to confuse everyone out there that's out for a walk with your dog. You don't need to hear me rambling on about all these numbers. But the truth is it said that there would be a 5% increase to the cap once the debt's repaid and revenues are basically back to normal. Well, they did it a little bit more than that because revenues have been so strong. In this window, of course, the Seattle Kraken have come in. There's a 32nd team. The league is getting more attendance than it's ever had in the past. And basically, they got to a point where at any point in time, I should say too, even though they have these agreements, the NHL and the NHLPA could arbitrarily agree, it's going to 100 million. Like they could, like the cap is not this mythical thing that humans can't control. If the sides ever agreed to do that, now there's reasons they wouldn't do that, but I'm just saying, the cap can be set at any number that both sides are willing to live by that. And so essentially they bumped it up a little bit to reflect where revenues are at. And I think it's great news. I mean, 300,000 extra from where it would have been 87.7 if it was 5%. Instead, you get 88 million. It's not even that's not even half the salary of a league minimum player next year, but it is more wiggle room for the teams to operate. It's obviously a good thing. There's more money in the system for players who are free agents this year and needing contracts. And I think most importantly, Jesse, it's a sign of what's to come because it can go up 5% again next summer, which takes you to 92 and something. I don't know the exact numbers. And it can go up 5% the next summer, which takes you to 97 million. And so I think that there's a world where heading into the 2026 season, which is when the next CBA has to be negotiated, and who knows what system they'll come up with there. And we're not going to get into labor talk on this pod right now. But by the time the next agreement has to be made between the owners and players, you probably are going to see a $97 million cap, assuming business is just assuming there's no more pandemics or something that we can't see coming, no black swan events that we don't know on the horizon. But so we're finally in this window where after years and years and years, and this is the biggest jump in the cap in 10 years, wow. Like from season to season. So, even prior to the pandemic, you were seeing $1 or $2 million jumps. To get a $4.5 million jump and then potentially another one and another one. I mean, it's basically going to mean the top players are going to get paid more. Probably the bottom players are going to get paid a little bit more. And teams are going to have more flexibility to make trades and to operate in a way that I think fans appreciate. I mean, I think, let's face it, we're here at the Stanley Cup final, but most of the fans in the league are like, what's my team doing in free agency? Who's getting traded? What's happening with Mitch Marner? I mean, like this is the league revolves around transactions and it revolves around that kind of news and those decisions. And so this is going to, I think, give the GMs a little bit more ability to make those moves. And ultimately, it's good for the sport. If the owners are making more money, the players are making more money. Probably the broadcasters are, maybe even some of us media people too. So, I mean, I think it's a health. The business is in a healthy place again after 5 or 6 years where it was challenging times. So I think it's hard not to see it as a win-win all around the board. And let's hope it leads to a little bit more action on the trade front.
I believe we went 25-ish minutes without mentioning Mitch Marner's name, and we just got it in there. So I think that's over the last couple of weeks, that's probably the longest we've gone without mentioning his name, but it got in there.
Yeah, it's funny. One of my colleagues last night was saying, do you realize how much they talk about Dak Prescott on ESPN? Like they were saying, like every day it's a topic. Like, how many yards are you going to throw for next year? And I'm like, dude, I didn't know that. I'm a Cowboys fan, but I'm not watching ESPN, obviously, where I live. But I'm like, it's Mitch Marner in Toronto, or it's the Leafs in general. What are the Leafs going to do? You can have that conversation on July 10th, November 10th, December 25th at your family Christmas event. Like, you can talk about the Leafs at any point, and it's always relevant. And that's just how it is. I think it's. I mean, I love that people care.
Yeah, if my next question to you was, okay, so now do the Leafs plans change now that they have an extra couple $1 million on the cap? How would that affect Mitch Marner? I'm sure we could have a great conversation about that.
Yeah, well, look, they're heading into a summer where they need to sign free agents, right? I mean, there's no mystery about that. They got to solve a goaltending situation that, to solidify themselves there. I think the Leafs are going to probably sign 2 defensemen or trade for a defenseman and sign another one, but probably looking at least 2 of the top 6 have to be new bodies next year. And so that's more operating money for them and lots of other teams. I mean, we had, I think, 16 or 17 teams this year right at the cap or above the cap using LTIR. Every team can use that $4.5 million. In the Leafs case, they've given it away because the Matthews and Nylander extensions kick in for next season. So if you look at the raises those players got compared to what they were making previously, that basically accounts for the Leafs $4.5 million. But the Leafs do definitely have operating cap space this summer. This is not one of those years where they're just signing 2 fourth liners and a third goalie. I mean, they're going to have to make impactful decisions. They're probably signing a winger that plays on the top line, at least part of next season, in addition to 2 defensemen and a goaltender who might end up playing more than Joseph Woll. So, I mean, it's a big summer, some big decisions on the horizon. And then, of course, there's that number 16 player. What are they going to do with him?
Yeah, I think because the core is locked up and they've been locked up forever, I don't think fans realize how much of the Leafs roster needs turnover this season. They have a lot of UFAs, there are a couple RFAs, and a lot of pieces need to go out and come back in. So there's going to be a lot of changes in the next few months and weeks with the Leafs.
Yeah, and honestly, focus on defensively. Like, I think that's the area where Brad Treliving is going to put his biggest stamp on the team. I mean, it's not to say, obviously, important decisions. Do you bring back Max Domi? If it's not Domi, who are you going and getting in the free agent pool? But, if there's lots of defensemen out there. Chris Tanev, we talked about at the trade deadline often. Can they convince him to come? Matt Roy's out there. Brett Pesce. I think the Leafs are going to be in the mix on the biggest defensemen available. And I do, as I say, I think they're going to get 2 of them one way or another. And of course, trade is another sort of dynamic that could be there. In addition to the fact that they love Joseph Woll, but they don't like that he's been injured a lot, and they're not sure what to make of that entirely, right? I mean, is that just a run of bad luck? Players get injured. This is part of the game, of course. Is that something he needs to change? Is it just an indicative that maybe he's someone they can't rely on to play 40, 50 games in the future, and he's more of a backup type of goaltender? I mean, everyone sees the promise in him, but I think they have to figure out who's going to be his tandem mate. And there are good goaltenders available in free agency, Jesse, but there's not a guy that you're like, he's definitely going to give us, 80% of the time he's going to give us good games. We can play him half the season. I mean, Laurent Brossoit had a great couple of years last year in Winnipeg, the year before in Vegas, but he's been a 20 to 25 game guy when you look over his career. And so there's others available. I mean, Ilya Samsonov is, quite frankly, one of the best available goaltenders in free agency, and the Leafs are letting him walk, right? So, yep. I mean, there's not an abundance of options there. That I have no doubt they're going to find a player, but the trade route might be the way to go, because certainly when you hear Jacob Markstrom, Linus Ullmark, John Gibson, it doesn't sound right now that Nashville is inclined to move UC Saros, but there are goaltenders available on the trade market that Toronto can at least look at too. They're not alone. New Jersey's out there looking for a goaltender. Lots of teams, Ottawa in the market to try to improve themselves in that position. But it's going to be a fascinating summer. And the good news is, I'd say by next week we're going to get to where some of this stuff is really going to become real. I mean, we're on the other side of the combine. Just happened in Buffalo. Obviously, teams put a lot of energy and effort into that in terms of getting to familiarize themselves with the prospects, being down there, having meetings with their staffs. But, by next week, free agency is going to start to really come into focus in the NHL, and talking to agents and some team people in the last 2 or 3 days, it feels like, we're going to start to get some movement, I guess, a little bit on those fronts, because right now there's not a lot of decisions being made, right? There's a lot of stuff being kicked around, but, other than the McDonough trade with him going back to Tampa, there hasn't been a lot of movement of players in the last 7 weeks. But I think that's soon going to change.
I think we can hold the Gary press conference and just follow up on what you were talking about right there. And just Markstrom made a lot of noise in the last couple days and his potential move out of Calgary. It seems like New Jersey are the front runners, but you mentioned Ottawa and Toronto. They're also in the market. Do you have an angling where he might go and how soon this deal might be made? And why is Calgary so insistent on getting rid of somebody they have under contract for the next 2 seasons?
Well, I don't know that he's that happy there at this point. I mean, I don't think that he kind of made it known. He didn't expand on it, but I think he made it known that he wasn't sure about the direction of the team and the way they handled his potential trade situation last year, where they're dealing away the Lindholms, the Zadorov, Tanev. I mean, they're trading good players, and obviously had discussions with him to the point where he was willing to waive his no move clause to go to New Jersey, and it didn't happen. And so I think that it's probably at the stage where he's a veteran player. He wants to try to win, and he's not entirely comfortable with what's going on there and the direction of the team. And so I just think it's time more than anything. And I have to believe the Devils get this done. I mean, this is not the same as me reporting. It's like the trade framework is all worked out. But I mean,
no, somebody clip this and tweet it out. It's done.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's done. I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole, but like there's a little bit of nuance sometimes if you're actually listening to the pod and not just like getting a screen grab on your X feed. But I just think that because he was willing to go there, because they're definitely like him still, they would like to trade for him. I mean, even Tom Fitzgerald has told reporters, in addition to his colleagues, he would trade the number 10 overall pick. I'm not saying for Markstrom, but in general, like he's very out there looking to make a deal. It feels like the ingredients are all there for this to eventually get done with New Jersey. I suppose someone could come in and make a better offer, but keep in mind, I mean, Markstrom has a say in this. And so, it just feels as though it's time for those, for a change in direction. And, look, he's into his 30s. He's had a great career, but he hasn't played in a game like the one that's going to be played behind me here tonight. So, I think that he's going to get somewhere where the team has a real chance to make some noise and do some damage. And I mean, look, the Devils, it sets up. I mean, they had a disappointing season. There's no way around that this year. But, hiring Sheldon Keefe, some of the things they're able to do in the offseason and just bringing back a lot of good players, hoping for a healthier season. I mean, they had a young blue line. They've got another year of experience. It's hard not to think the Devils aren't going to be playing playoff games next spring, at least for me.
Yeah, if you look at it, you maybe Markstrom and then just a healthy Dougie Hamilton, because when he went out, their entire blue line was destroyed. He was holding it together. So just having him, hopefully for a season, like the Devils should be very good next season. And Sheldon Keefe too. You'll get the new coach bump. I think he'll go in there and motivate the guys. And yeah, the Devils should be in playoff contention at least.
Well, and Sheldon Keefe's a good coach. I mean, yeah. I know the Leafs didn't get over the hump. I think there's a lot of dynamics for a reason that didn't happen. I'm not even saying he shouldn't have been fired. Like, I mean, I think at a certain point you do have to go in a different direction as a team, but he's a really good coach who's won everywhere. He's had teams going back to the Ontario Hockey League when he coached in Pembroke before that. And then obviously, helped the Marlies to a lot of great seasons and won a Calder Cup. So I think he's, man, like if you're looking for a team, don't sleep on heading to next year. I think the Devils are the one.
Mm-hmm. And back to where we originally started and Gary's presser, the big thing that they announced I believe it was off the top, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was the Four Nations face-off schedule. And all of the excitement around that. It's going to replace the All-Star game in 2025, the Four Nations that face off, Canada, USA, Finland, and Sweden. It's going to be in Montreal and Boston. They confirmed the cities. The first half is going to take place in Montreal, and then all the teams and the players are going to fly over to Boston and finish out the tournament. It's going to be round robin only. So they're going to have the round robin determine the top 2 teams, and the 2 teams play a championship game, and they have their points layout for wins, losses, and ties. And are you excited for this? How do you think it's going to get underway? It's cool to have best on best coming back. Like, what are you thinking about for the Four Nations face-off?
So it's an exhibition, right? Like it's basically replacing the All-Star game. How do I put this? Like, no one is going to remember it, really. I don't think. Like, I'm not saying it's not worth doing, but it's not historically significant, right? Like the 2010 Olympic men's hockey tournament and women's, but men's because we're talking about that. was historically significant. Sidney Crosby scored what is probably going to be, it's probably the defining moment of Sidney Crosby's career, is that overtime goal to win Canada gold medal on home ice. Even though he's won 3 Stanley Cups, 2 Conn Smythes, and he's going to find himself in the top 10 in league scoring when all is said and done. That's still the defining moment of his career. Like, that meant something. This is not going to really mean something, but what it's going to do, it's just not. I mean, there's no way around it. It's an in-season tournament. You don't have lots of other great players. I mean, Leon Draisaitl is one of the stars of the game that's going to play in the Stanley Cup final. He's not invited, right?
Mm-hmm.
David
the
Pasternak,
team that won the World Championship. Yeah, they're not going to be
invited.
there.
They're playing Switzerland in the World Championship final. Guess what? Roman Yossi's not invited. Nico Hischier's not invited. So it's we have to remember what it is and what it isn't. And so I'm not down on it. It's easy. It's just easy to complain about everything. Like, that seems to be the way things go. I'm not complaining, but I think it's important to note the context that it's a little appetizer. It's going to give us a game that features McDavid and Crosby on one side and Tkachuk and Matthews on the other side. Like, you're going to get a Canada-US game, and it's going to be cool. Like, there's no way around it. Like, I think if you're tuning in that night, is it February 15th? I think Canada-US play. Like, when you're tuning in, you're going to be like, wow, what is this going to give us? But I just think at the end of the day, the tournament itself is not, it will be lost to time. It's worth doing because we're getting reintroduced, but the real thing is the 2026 Olympics the next year. And then hopefully they can get a World Cup which is the goal every sort of 2 years from the Olympics. So we get those cycles going and you involve the other countries again. You give Switzerland a chance to play, because that country, if you look at their record in the world, like, they've taken a step, a meaningful step in their development. They have a lot of players. I mean, if we create something like soccer's World Cup, I just think the Olympics is the best thing I ever covered, man. Like I'm getting older and I've been so lucky. I think this is my 18th Stanley Cup final. But the things I remember the most or cherish the most as experiences are the Olympics. And I think winning the cup as a player is probably more important than winning a gold medal, but like watching a gold medal, like, that's when people who don't ever watch hockey are watching, right? Like, you're capturing an audience. It's this moment in time. It's the same way I'll watch a bobsled event at the Olympics and get excited for a Canadian, but not watch bobsled for the next 3 years. Cause it's just, that's kind of what happens there. So, it's just a little amuse-bouche for the thing to come. That's like, I'm not down on the tournament, but I'm also not coming out of my socks excited for it. I'm somewhere in the middle on that.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the Canada USA game is going to be cool because that's going to be the true rosters and all the stars who would probably be, if this was a true World Cup, all these players would probably be on those teams. But in the context of the tournament where they're only allowing NHL players and you only have these 4 countries competing, it's not really a litmus test for the true hockey international competition of the world, because all the players aren't there, so it's not really, I understand how you can't really hold it to that standard.
I guess the question too is how much will the players themselves care? Like, I know they're going to, I don't know. I think they're going to be excited to pull on their national team sweaters. They're excited by the fact that we've got to this point. I mean, this has been a really nuclear winter of no real meaningful best on best hockey. I mean, 2016, and I was at the World Cup. There's lots to remember that was fun about that. The team, the young stars team and all that stuff. But like, it wasn't really, I don't know. It didn't hit great, honestly. It was played in September, out of the summer. Again, I just think how many people could, other than they can tell you about the Team North America, like what do people remember about it? Does everyone remember that Team Europe played in the final against Team Canada? I don't know how many casual hockey fans even remember that. Like, it wasn't, again, historically significant. So really, I'm going all the way back to the Sochi Olympics as the last time. That's 2014. Like, how many new players are going to be involved now, right? It's going to be just a small handful that were playing in those events that are going to be on any of these teams. You're going to have Crosby. It's no mystery. He was there and he's going to be there. Maybe you get a Drew Doughty, maybe, right? But there's not many players left. If you look at the 2016 roster, a lot of those guys are retired or they're just aged out of where they're going to be in serious consideration for these spots. I mean, Tavares was there. Maybe he gets there. Stamkos was there in 2016. Was injured for 2014, of course. Maybe he gets on the roster, but there really will only be 4 or 5 players at most for these teams. So it's a fresh start, and I think everyone will be excited by that. But again, I don't even know what the trophy is, but are they going to like carry it around? Or like what? Remember the World Cup trophy was kind of awkward. Like,
Yeah.
where does that even live? Like, do you think that's like just collecting dust somewhere? Like, what
It's
is that?
probably in the Hockey Hall of Fame, you know, because it's one-off, you know, like what else are you going to do with it? You just kind of throw it there. Like, I remember
Right.
that 2016 World Cup because I was there for some of it, but I'm also like the hardcorest of hardcore hockey fan. It's also the business I work in, you know, and I remember those, like
Right.
having Austin and McDavid on that Team North America, and that's an unreal thing that's never going to happen outside of like an all-star game if they were in the same team or something like that. But yeah, it doesn't.
And they didn't get past the round robin, right? Like,
Yeah.
like that's the thing. Like, they are by far the most memorable. Like, it was cool. Like, I'm not lying. That was cool, but they didn't even get to the medal round or whatever.
Right.
I can't remember exactly how the format was, but they lost after their third game. They were done. So, like, I don't know if the best thing we remember is a team that played round robin games. Like, it was gimmicky, and it was played in September. I think at least this is a mid-season tournament. Like, players are going to be in form. I mean, it's February. Like, if you're in North America or even in Europe, parts of Europe, like it's winter. Like, what else are you gonna do? You're gonna watch hockey. So I just think all those things conspire to make this like good, but I don't think it's gonna be great.
And this is like you said, this is just the appetizer to hopefully get the league on a schedule where they're going All-Star game, Olympics, World Cup, All-Star game. Like, that's their 4-year run, I believe, is the timeline they're kind of working towards. And hopefully they'll be able to hopefully get the international hockey governing bodies in on their World Cup so that we can just have best on best from everybody in the world and not just NHL players because it's an NHL sanctioned event.
Yeah, and hopefully that one day we get to where there's like real qualifying, right? Where like, you know, the top teams obviously will probably be in, like Canada and US are going to be there. Sweden and Finland are going to be there, but then, you know, give some of the smaller nations, Slovenia, give Anze Kopitar and his countrymen a chance to qualify. Like, that would be the ideal. I don't know what that looks like, how the money works. I realize it's a giant logistical thing to get off the ground, but like that's where the goal should be, I think, is like having this like really be something. Like, how cool is it, even though the Canadian men got their butts kicked, how cool is it that Canada qualified for the last Men's World Cup? Like it hadn't happened in our lifetimes, basically, right? So, like, I think you're trying to get to where even some countries that aren't going there to win it, but have a chance to qualify to get in it, because even just being there means something. It's a sign of a step forward for the program. So I'm with you. I hope that gets there. And then also, it's funny you mentioned the way to solve the problem, because we have this conversation every year at the All-Star game. Like, how do you make the All-Star game more interesting? Have less of them. That's the answer, right?
Yeah.
Like, have a World Cup one year, and then, you know, have one, and then have an Olympics, and maybe just space them out, and then it's its own little thing. And, you know, every season of the All-Star game, let's face it, not the greatest either.
Yeah, especially with where it's trending. That's such a good point. You know, you just have less All-Star games, and then when it comes around every whatever in the 4-year cycle, 2 years in that 4 years, then it feels kind of more special because we don't get All-Star games all the time anymore if you have those Olympics and World Cup. So that'll be cool to see. I hope they're able to pull it off in the future, and I will see how this thing goes on June 6th or July 5th. I forget the actual date, but they're announcing the first
June 28th.
June 28th. Sorry, at the draft, is that? They're announcing the first 6 players for each team?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
I'm gonna spare you. Crosby's gonna be on Team Canada.
Spoiler.
Matthews and Tkachuk will be on Team USA. Matthew Tkachuk. So
McDavid will be there, I assume.
I mean, he might be the 7th pick. He might have to wait.
That'd be ridiculous. Last thing from the Bettman press conference that we'll touch on. The Bettman was asked a question about Joel Quenneville and Stan Bowman. He said they are currently not eligible. That's something I have to consider. Do you have any insight on how this is going and they're asking about getting back into the league?
Well, this is entirely at Gary Bettman's discretion. You know, this is not a case where there's a series of panels or like it's when the commissioner wants or is willing to let these guys work in the league again. And obviously I can't answer if that's ever going to happen because, you know, I'm not inside Gary Bettman's mind, but clearly we're at a stage where, you know, both Joel Quenneville and Stan Bowman have been out of the NHL almost 4 years now. 3 years, I guess it is. And they want to get back to work. You know, in Quenneville's case, you know, he's in his 60s. He's hoping to get one more chance to coach. Stan Bowman's a little younger, so I think he can afford to wait in terms of, you know, the fact he'll be among us. But like it's a I guess it's a kind of it's a hard one to handicap or discuss, because ultimately it just comes down to what Gary Bettman wants to do. And you know, I don't know what the right answer is here. I'll be honest. I mean, you know, I'm not advocating the responsibility of these guys in the Kyle Beach situation. You know, it did sound like they reported to people above them about what they knew, and we're expecting those people to take, you know, some action. And, you know, really, I guess for the league, it's partially about, you know, they don't want negative headlines. They want to make sure the right justice is done. At some point, I have to think you're going to see them work in the league again. I don't think this is going to be a lifetime ban, but there's no clarity on when that will be. And, you know, there's been some talk that maybe when Stan Bowman comes back, the league, you know, allows him to be an assistant GM versus being a GM, you know, returning the job he had. It's a little tricky for Joel Quenneville. I kind of see him going and being an assistant coach. I mean, even if he was willing to do that, I'm not sure that's the good setup. Imagine being the head coach with Joel Quenneville as your assistant with the success he's had and everything he's done in the game. So, you know, the best I can say is repeat what Gary said. They're still not allowed to work in the NHL. I think maybe this summer we'll see if that changes. But certainly the league has not been in a rush to let those guys back in. I mean, remember, there was a meeting of all NHL coaches and general managers in Chicago in September. They actually had Bowman and Quenneville come there to talk about what they learned through that experience, share, you know, I think as a cautionary tale, you know, what can happen, you know, the fact you can't just assume someone above you is going to take care of something, that you have to take action as anyone in a position of power when these kind of situations, you know, come along. And, you know, that was several months ago, 9 months ago, and these guys still aren't allowed back in. Like at the time, I thought that was maybe a sign that they were on their way back, but it hasn't happened. So, you know, we'll just have to wait and see how Gary Bettman continues to view this, because ultimately it's his decision and his decision alone.
As a kind of an aside, I always find it funny whenever these big decisions come about for the league and everything, and it always just comes down to Gary Bettman, and he has like emperor powers around the NHL to just kind of call his shot in whatever he feels he needs to do in those moments. Like some of these things with like appealing suspensions, or even in like the case of Shane Pinto's suspension, Gary can just kind of make a decision on what he wants to do there, and then letting these guys back into the league is just up to him. And I feel like there should be more, like there should some sort of board or advisory council or something. And it's always blows my mind that Gary just gets to have carte blanche decision with everything he kind of does.
You know what? There's actually something called the NHL Constitution. And it's literally like the rules of the league. I guess it's like the U.S. Constitution. Like it's meant to be the founding principles of the United States of America. And the commissioner has tremendous power in there. Like the commissioner can like take away first round draft picks, or like it says this, it spells this out in the Constitution, can impose $1 million fines on teams for acting in certain ways. I mean, just by the nature of the way the league's set up, the commissioner, it's not just Gary Bettman, whoever's in that seat does have tremendous power. And so it's always going to be that way, even beyond Gary, unless they change literally the founding principles of the league. So it's not.
Wow.
It's a Constitution, and obviously it's, when you're talking about suspensions, I mean, that's a CBA matter that would have to be negotiated with the players. But why would the league give back that power? I'm sure they like having one. I mean, the one thing you and I may disagree with Gary Bettman on all kinds of things, but the one thing I can say, I do believe fully he's acting in the way that he thinks is best for the league, right? Like you can't question that, or for the owners, which you know comprise the league. So, you know, I think that they want someone in that role who's doing what that person thinks is best for the league. And again, you and I and the viewers and the listeners might have all kinds of different views about certain decisions he makes, but you have to at least give it to him that you believe that he's doing what he thinks is right. He just might not be right all the time. None of us are.
This was probably the most talked about thing on Twitter yesterday when I asked for questions, and just seeing the whole Discord on hockey Twitter yesterday. Cap Friendly is coming to an end on July 5th. The Washington Capitals, they didn't announce it, just got reported and leaked that they have purchased Cap Friendly. And if you're not familiar with Cap Friendly, it's a site where the fans and people in the industry and working for teams and everybody goes to find out salary cap information for players around the NHL. And it's been a tremendous resource for years for fans and people in the game alike. So the Washington Capitals purchased this thing up, and they've purchased it from the guys who co-created it a few years ago, and they want it to exist through the draft. Cap Friendly does for fans and through free agency. So it'll come to an end on July 5th. But do you have any insight onto why they would do this? Obviously, it's a competitive advantage. You're taking this away from everybody that uses it, but also you're getting all of these tools for your team and holding them for yourself. So what do you think about this? A sad day for fans, but good for Washington Capitals for doing a strategic play here. What do you think?
I don't have like a strong opinion personally, but I would say it makes sense why it would happen. I mean, look at Tom Porzaska, who works for a site called General Manager. Some of you may remember it or not. He created an expansion draft tool back when he was running his site, which did, fundamentally the same thing as Cap Friendly, Cap Geek before it. Puckpedia is still out there doing this. And, he got hired by the Vegas Golden Knights, and he was part of a team that won a Stanley Cup last year. And so, I know that Tom did much more than create a website. I mean, he has a tremendous understanding of how contracts work, of how the salary cap system works, of maybe ways to look at players and help make personnel decisions in terms of, cap dynamics, not just talking about on ice abilities. And so, you're buying that if you're the Capitals. You're buying, people who understand on a level that most of us can't, how the CBA functions, how the cap is working every day, how teams are managed, how decisions are made, and you're taking it out of the public realm. So you're now not allowing everybody else just to type in a few characters on their computer or their smartphone and see, what's going on around the league. And so it's huge. And, my understanding is, I think that, part of what Cap Friendly was doing was providing behind the scenes some proprietary information, something of value that they and they alone were doing. And so not only is Washington now acquiring that value, they're making sure that the other 31 teams don't get access to it. Unfortunately, of course, fans and media members and everyone else who used it, get lost in that. But I mean, look, this is only one team gets to lift the Stanley Cup, right? So it's a competitive business, and Washington made this decision. I think other teams were interested, sounds like, in acquiring the site, and ultimately the Capitals do so. But when something goes away, it's an opportunity for something to replace it, and I think. Puckpedia has done a great job for years. It's a site I've used, and I think it will only be better for this in a sense, because we need it to be better. Everyone needs a resource for this. I mean, the salary cap itself, the creation of this system in the NHL is required. If you're a hardcore fan, you understand that your team only has so much space to operate with, and you need to be able to look at contracts and things like that. So, I think it's a great thing for Dominic Zrim and those on the Cap Friendly side, because they worked so hard to build that thing into what it was, right? It was a great resource. It was a great tool. I used it probably for 10 years. I'm old enough to remember Cap Geek, which preceded it. But, it for them, I have to assume it's a good payday. It's a great opportunity. Obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be making that decision. And this is how the business will go. But I do think, Puckpedia and maybe some other sites that are unnamed or I'm not aware of at this point will rise up in the wake, because it's an invaluable resource. The league needs this to exist for all of us to really follow it on the level that you want from a hardcore fan or a media member.
Mm-hmm. And I saw a lot of people trying to point fingers at the Capitals for like nefarious reasons. They bought this to shut it down for fans and all that stuff. But there's so much in there for just a hockey, from a competitive standpoint, to own this information and bring in these guys who are very smart and very intelligent and bring them into your organization. It makes perfect sense from a hockey sense if you have the money to go out and spend it and do this. And you mentioned like the API resources that are connected to Cap Friendly for these teams behind the scenes, and taking that away from your competitors, because the whole goal is to win a Stanley Cup. And if you can just spend however money it costs to buy Cap Friendly, like you're making it. There's a stronger chance you could win a Stanley Cup just by having this information, having these guys in your organization. So there's nothing really nefarious going on. They're not trying to hurt fans here or anything like that.
No, that's how a free market works. If you're a fan and you love that site, well, that shows it has value, right? It shows that it's worth something. And obviously the Capitals recognize that and went and bought it. Like it's hard for me to, as much as I loved using it, and like part of me is a bit sad that it's going to be one less tool at my disposal. I mean, in the end, let's just pour one out for the guys at Cap Friendly. Lots of work, lots of energy, and what I have to assume is a just reward for them. So something new is going to be great. Puckpedia already exists and will get even better. And, there was a time when Cap Geek, Matt West, I don't know if you know Matt, I actually met him many years ago, ended up dying of colon cancer in 2015, but he started the Cap Geek site. And, unfortunately, when his life ended way too soon, people thought that nothing would come in the wake of that. And Cap Friendly was born out of that era. So there will be something great beyond it, is all I'll say to fans out there who are distressed about this.
Yeah, the first reaction to this news for fans should be like the happiness for the Cap Friendly guys and moving on to, I think, a great opportunity, working for an NHL team. And CJ, I've held you way too long. You got things to do today. You got to go talk to the Oilers. No big deal. And then hang out more in that empty arena. So I'll let you go here. But it's been a pleasure filling in for Julian while he's been jet setting around the world. So hopefully next time he's on a plane, I can rejoin you here on the CJ Show.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, he calls me Big Money CJ. I think we should be calling him Big Money Julian, because I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. He's been here, there, and everywhere. I assume he's flying first class, drinking champagne, living the good life, which we're happy for our brother and our buddy. And thanks for filling in. And look at enjoy the rest of the Cup final, my man.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out tonight. Stanley Cup final. I'm excited. It's gonna be a great series based off of Game 1. And Julian, you can have your spot back on Thursday.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.